President Trump has floated a bold and audacious plan for revising the population of the Gaza Strip, which many are referring to as a proposal for ethnic cleansing. Others are defending it as a visionary project. And some are saying, well, at least it's a new idea because the two-state solution is dead anyway. What is your take on what's going on with the Gaza Strip? Is this an opening bargaining move by Trump, or does he actually mean it?
You know, it's really hard to say. The one thing that I can definitely say about this is it is completely impractical. There is not any government anywhere, and in particular the neighboring Arab states, that is going to take in 2 million people, or with the West Bank included, 7 million people. Nobody is going to do that, and the Arab world is united in opposition to the idea of the Palestinians being thrown off their land. So that's something that the entire Arab world is unanimously against that, and would see that as ethnic cleansing. So I don't think Trump is ultimately going to be serious about this build a resort on the Mediterranean idea, or about U.S. control, which he says he can do without American boots on the ground. That doesn't seem realistic. But unfortunately, it is being seized on by the extreme right in Israel as an American endorsement of the idea of population transfer, and that's dangerous. But I don't see. There's nobody that is going to be a cooperating destination for that, and it seems extremely impractical. Trump made another, I'm not sure if you had seen it this morning, but Trump made another threat overnight about, the Hamas had delayed the next tranche of hostage releases. And he said if they don't release all of them by Saturday, all hell will break loose. And so that's another, very near-term landmine in our path that could very well go off, because that's probably not that's not something that's going to lead Hamas back to the negotiating table.
On a slightly related topic, since you're an energy expert, what about these tariffs that Trump is imposing upon Canada? There was an article, I think, today in the New York Times suggesting that this would hit the Midwest, that it would lead to an increase in diesel and gas prices. How significant do you think it is?
So the problem with that is, you normally think of oil as a globalized, fungible commodity, where prices one place affect prices everywhere. And for the most part, that's actually true. But in large inland areas in the middle of a continent, whether in Europe or here, there are areas that are dependent on specific pipeline flows to get to the local refineries and supply the local demand. And there's just not really any other way to do it. And so, we have a number of refineries in the Midwest and a couple in the Plains states that are just hardwired into Canadian heavy crude that comes down that pipeline network. And there really is not a mechanism for saying, okay, we're not going to buy Canadian oil, we'll buy from somewhere else, we'll bring it in from sea. It comes in, there's nothing to get it from a port in Louisiana to a refinery near Chicago. And so if Canada, if the tariff is imposed, a lot of that is going to get passed on to motorists. A lot of that's going to get passed on to the trucking industry. And of course, if trucking charges go up, then the price of the item on the shelf they delivered is going to go up to make up for that. And of course, it would also require the Canadian producers to discount a bit. So there'd be economic losses all along the value chain, producer to consumer there. The Canadians have actually, this wouldn't happen, I don't think, but if they actually stopped supplying the US, that would be a catastrophe, because there just is no way to get that much refined product up from the Gulf Coast up to the Midwest and Plains states. It just wouldn't work.
Well, if they stopped supplying it, where would they supply it to?
There is nowhere. They only have a little bit of capacity to take Alberta crude out to the Pacific. They have the Trans Mountain Pipeline. And I don't remember the exact capacity off the top of my head, but it's only a couple 100,000 barrels a day. It's like 10% of what they produce. So there's a little bit of it that's already going to Asian markets, but they have very little capacity in the short term. Of course, if we keep jerking them around on this, and I'm clearly not a big proponent of the idea, that's going to encourage Canada to build more pipeline capacity out to the Pacific and develop the means of selling that oil. It's interesting, the First Nations, or as Canada calls Native Americans, some of the First Nation tribes in British Columbia had been opposed to building that pipeline and then had been opposed to capacity additions. And some of their leaders have actually recently said, this is such a big deal, we might actually change our opposition to that because Canada is between a rock and a hard place here, and we have to do something about it. So that was the First Nations opposition to those pipelines was a big political issue in Canada for a long time. And if that were removed, they probably could build extra pipeline capacity. But it's certainly not something that it's in American interests to encourage them to do.
Where do you see oil prices headed over the next year?
There are always a multitude of plausible scenarios. I think that I see a relatively neutral to mildly bearish picture if nothing blows up on us that would take supplies offline. China is kind of at peak demand right now. It is possible that Chinese demand is actually going to start gradually contracting. If it doesn't happen this year or next, it probably is the year after that. But without Chinese demand growing, you still have some growth in India and some other developing countries, offsetting the kind of gradual demand declines in Europe. And you also have some demand growth going on. The U.S. is down from its peak. But if we roll back the vehicle fuel efficiency standards, which Trump has decided that he's going to do, that will put on a tranche of additional U.S. demand that wouldn't have been there otherwise.
Would it, though, with California and the other states resisting any rollback?
So California, and there are several other blue states that have similar standards to California. And so California is kind of a pace setter. But California is not really the pace setter for the entire country. So they design certain models that are California-driven designs, but that doesn't drive what the auto industry is doing for the rest of the country. There also is an attempt by the Trump administration to take away their EPA exemption that allows California to even do that in the first place. And that's a complicated legal question. But assuming they keep the ability to have their own standards and enforce them locally, it still makes a big difference for the rest of the country.
Well, Greg, thank you for your insights.
Thank you.